Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Today's guest is our friend Nancy Richardson Fischer, returning to the show to talk about her book, The Speed of Falling Objects. Before we get into this interview with Nancy, let's hear from some sponsors that make the show possible. Jasper T. Scott. His box set Dark Space, the complete series. This is 6 books bundled together, on sale now for 99 cents. 6 complete books, over 600,000 copies sold, more than 2,000 pages of epic space opera for the low price of 99 cents. Also available in Kindle Unlimited if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Humanity is defeated. 10 years ago, the Scythians invaded the galaxy with one goal: to wipe out the human race. Now the survivors are hiding in the last human sector of the galaxy, Dark Space, once a place of exile for criminals, now the last refuge of mankind. The once galaxy-spanning Imperium of Star Systems is left guarding the gate, which is the only way in or out of Dark Space, but not everyone is satisfied with their governance. Freelancer and ex-convict Ethan Ortain is on the run. He owes crime lord Alec Barandi 10,000 souls, and his ship is badly damaged. When Barandi catches up with him, he makes an offer Ethan can't refuse. Ethan must infiltrate and sabotage the Valiant, the Imperial Star Systems fleet carrier which stands guarding the entrance of Dark Space, and then his debt will be cleared. While Ethan is still undecided about what he'll do, he realizes that the Imperium has been lying and putting all of Dark Space at risk. Now Barandi's plan is starting to look like a necessary evil, but before Ethan can act on it, he discovers that the real plan was much more sinister than what he was told, and he will be lucky to escape the Valiant alive. Grab all 6 books for 99 cents right now. Dark Space, the complete series by Jasper T. Scott. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. Survivor, Mother, Leader, and Humanity's Last Chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them, but now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light, and that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Edge of Valor, a military sci-fi thriller by Josh Hayes. When their mission fails, his begins. David Weber calls it a tour de force. Special Agent Jackson Fisher is a man after truth. When a military operation to extract a high-ranking ambassador from the war-torn border world of Stonemaier ends in disaster, Fisher is called in to investigate. A whole platoon went in, but only 3 Alliance Marines returned home. The rest killed in action along with hundreds of civilians. With tensions between the Holloman Alliance and Stonemaier rising, Fisher attempts to stitch the pieces together. One thing becomes more and more certain: the surviving Marines are lying. As the truth unfurls, Fisher begins to realize this was far more than a simple rescue mission, and that the truth might be something best left buried. Filled with action, mystery, and well-crafted characters, Edge of Valor, the Valor series Book 1, will put you into a world of war, conspiracy, and betrayal. It's perfect for fans of David Weber's Honorverse or Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan with a futuristic flair. That's Edge of Valor by Josh Hayes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have my friend Nancy Richardson Fischer back on the show with us today. Last year, she was on the show talking about her new, at the time, book, When Elephants Fly. It was such a tremendous book, one of my favorite books of last year. But she has a new book that is out. It just came out yesterday, guys. It's called The Speed of Falling Objects. And Nancy, I'm just going to tell you, you really took it up another level with this new book. I don't know how you did it, but I can't wait to talk about it. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much.
Well, last year we talked about kind of your beginnings in writing, and you told us that one of your first memories of wanting to be a storyteller was that you really wanted to be a comedian, and that first book of jokes that you got. Is comedy something that's still important to you in your writing, in your creativity, but just as a person? Do you really look for, the things in life that bring a little lightheartedness or things that we can kind of poke fun of?
Yes, I realize now that myself as a comedian, that is not my wheelhouse, but I love watching other people do it well, and I think it's so important. I think when you read the news lately, you can really get bogged down in all the negativity. It seems like every story out there is poking at our amygdala and meant to scare us and make us angry. And so I try really hard to focus on the things that are funny in life.
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you what, if you watch the news very much, you better find something you can laugh at.
Exactly.
You've had a really interesting writing career in working freelance for LucasArts, and then helping other people with their autobiographies, and then writing things for yourself. In the time that you spent helping other people tell their stories, and you've done quite a few sports autobiographies, what do you think you learned about storytelling and about telling your stories by helping other people tell theirs?
Well, it was really fascinating to write other people's stories and to learn how to write in another voice. That was a great skill to learn, and also to separate myself from the story. It wasn't my story, so I could be very open to criticism, or open to constructive criticism of changing certain aspects of what I wrote. That has definitely helped me as an author to realize that nothing I write is so precious that it can't be changed or made infinitely better. I learned a lot from working with athletes. Bella Caroli taught me that I should never try and be someone else, that I should always embrace who I am. He told a story about how when he came to the United States, he never tried to make the next gymnast he worked with the same as the previous gymnast. So he was a famous gymnastics coach. He worked with Nadia Comaneci. But when he worked with, let's say, Mary Lou Retton, he never tried to make Mary Lou Nadia. He always believed that you had to discover your own unique skills, and that if you tried to copy someone else, you would never shine as brightly. So that really helped. And each athlete taught me a different lesson. Monica Seles, who was a tennis player, who was stabbed on the tennis court by a fan of Steffi Graf. She taught me that you have to face your fears and try and live in the moment. Julie Crone, who is a famous jockey, taught me that you should never allow something horrific like a terrible accident like she had during a race to derail your career. So there were so many lessons I learned throughout that process of telling other people's stories.
Well, what's interesting to me is, when you're working on a book for Apollo Ono or Nadia Comaneci, these people are probably not people that you interacted with on a daily basis before working with them. And, in a lot of ways, some of our sports heroes are fictional characters. They're larger than life characters. When you're working with someone like that and looking for the thing to help us as readers connect to them like they're real people, like they are, do you start looking for ways to, I guess when you're working on a story like that, do you start looking for ways to humanize these people so that we, the reader, can have a better connection to them? Because when we watch them on, Saturday or Sunday afternoon on TV, they're just so, that they might as well be, Greek gods on Olympus, a lot of them. But when you're writing their story, we need to find a way to ground them. And in working through that process, does that help you with creating your own fictional characters?
It definitely does help, just in the sense that each of those athletes, most of those athletes I actually lived with. So I would live in their home, I would travel with them. So I could see what their workout schedule was like, who they interacted with on a daily basis, what they ate, when they were tired, what happened when they were angry or afraid. So those things really help you to find their voice and write in their voice, the books that they read. And when you're creating a character, you're getting to know that character in a really similar way because you're asking those same questions. In my new novel, I would ask myself, what would Danny do right now? What would she be reading? What would her cultural references be? What would she watch on TV? So whether it's a real person or a fictional character, it's all about creating layers.
Sure. And those layers then begin to help you to find the things that we can connect with those characters.
Exactly.
Right. You also worked, we mentioned earlier, with some Lucas properties and writing some books in the Junior Jedi Knight series. Were you a science fiction fan when you were younger?
I love science fiction. If you play the music from the original Star Trek, which I was surprised to hear was only on television for a year, I can tell you every episode just from the opening music.
Oh yeah.
Did you used to watch?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. My mom. I saw them in reruns, but my mom was a huge Star Trek fan, and I've watched them all dozens of times, probably.
Yeah, I love them. Or the new Battlestar Galactica, which now isn't so new anymore.
Right.
Did you watch that one?
Mm-hmm.
I loved it.
Oh, yeah.
I loved it so much that 5 years after my husband and I watched it, we watched it again.
I love it.
So that's commitment, because I think that series went 5 or 6 years.
Right. Exactly. So after you've had this really interesting path that you work with other people's true life stories, and then you also work in this existing universe with all of these rules set and these characters established. What kind of a transition is that from working in autobiographies to working in something that we're all so infinitely familiar with, like the Star Wars universe?
Well, without any spoilers, I will say that in a sport autobiography, there might be a little fiction to round out your characters. Not fiction in the sense of, you can't say Monica Seles won this match when she lost it. But you're talking with the athlete and talking about things that might make them more interesting. So you're embellishing a little bit. So I had a little bit of a fiction background before I started working within the Star Wars universe. And then, I was so familiar with the movies that they seemed almost real to me. So it wasn't that much of a leap to move on to write a Star Wars trilogy.
Gotcha. How much creative freedom do you have in working on something like that?
Surprisingly, you have a lot. You can create different races. You just have to stay within the universe in terms of the planets that are created. And that series was about Anakin Solo, who is the youngest son of Han and Leia, who are married in the adult novels. So Lucasfilm basically said he's going to the planet Yavin 8 to a junior Jedi academy. Okay, do what you want. You have 3 books. So I could move him to different planets. I could create different species for him to interact with. And I think ultimately when it went to the copy editors at Lucasfilm, they would flag anything that didn't make sense within the universe for me to change.
Gotcha. Your book that you released last year, When Elephants Fly, when we first got to talk, is such an amazing book, and really it's so lighthearted in a lot of ways. The character of Lily is such a great character and so easy for us to connect to. But Lily's got a lot of stuff going on, and when she sees the story of this elephant and who attacks her calf, it unlocks all of this stuff going on with her. It's been a year since we talked about that book, and when we talked about it last, it was just coming out. What has been your experience now that book has lived in the open for a year and people have gotten to read it? Have you gotten feedback from readers, and how has that book connected in ways that you hoped that it would?
It's been actually pretty incredible because readers will write me and say, in case your listeners don't know, it's about a young woman named Lily who has this overwhelming family history of mental health conditions, and she's trying to live a careful life to avoid triggering schizophrenia, which runs in her family. And we all have things hanging over our heads that keep us from living in the moment, but the mental health aspect really connected with readers, and so many readers have written me and said, thank you so much for writing this story. My mom has a bipolar condition, or I suffer from depression, and this story has reminded me about the importance of living in the moment and not allowing fear to define my life. And that's been the most fulfilling part of When Elephants Fly, is just that connection with readers, and that the story may have actually helped some people.
Well, it's such a weird thing that, for so long, mental health was really a taboo, and we didn't really talk about things in polite company. Yet so many of us either deal with things ourselves, or, every one of us has a family member that we can all relate a story to. Why do you think it's becoming easier to talk about? Not that it is easy, but it surely, different from when you and I were kids. Why do you think people are really longing for these kinds of stories?
I think that pop culture has helped a lot. I think that having celebrities, for the younger generation, having celebrities come out and say that they, have a mental health condition has helped destigmatize speaking about it. And I also think today's generation is more comfortable with talking about things like that. I mean, what do you think? I don't.
Yeah, I think I think books like your book and things like that help to open the conversation, and when we can root these kinds of stories with a character that we really love, like Lily. I think that really helps, to show that these things are things that most of us have dealt with in one way or another.
I think that's so true. When you find something or someone who you can empathize with, that you can normalize in a way, it really helps to open the conversation.
The new book, it just came out yesterday, so congratulations on the book launch. The Speed of Falling Objects. I've had this book for a couple months now. I think I tagged you on Instagram when I first got it, and told you how excited I was for it. This book is so different from the first book, yet it has so much Nancy in this book, if that makes sense. Like it's absolutely one of your books. It's your voice, but a completely different story. Tell us where the seed of this book came from.
Well, I am obsessed with survival stories. I don't know if you've ever read Touching the Void about mountaineers who are injured, who crawl off a mountain and survive, or any of the Shackleton's expedition stories. Have you ever read any of those?
Yes.
So I love those, and I love that you don't really know who you are or who the people around you are until you're put in such a difficult life or death situation. And then I'm also obsessed with the TV show Naked and Afraid. Have you watched that?
I have not, but I've seen lots of promos for it.
Okay, it looks a little bit cheesy. And the hook is that they take one man and one woman who are from very different backgrounds, and they put them in a horrible situation in the jungle or a swamp or a desert with no clothes. And they each get one survival item. So,
just to ramp up the awkward.
Right. The no clothes thing is the hook, obviously, so people will watch it, although they blur out all the bits and pieces. But they get one survival item, and then they have to survive for 3 weeks to 60 days, really, really long time frame. And it's incredible to me, the transformation that happens. The person you think would be really tough, they'll have, an ex-army guy with a homemaker who has 3 children, who has no survival skills, yet she'll be tougher than he is in the end. And so I love those kind of situations. And so I wanted to create a story where I put a character in similar circumstances, although I left her with her clothes on. And I thought, what better place than the Amazon rainforest? There's 3,600 species of spiders, 2.5 million insects, 17 types of venomous snakes. So if you're going to find out who you are, that's probably a good place. And the second inspiration for the story is the idea that we create ourselves from our childhood experiences, from the things we remember, but also tragedies, misperceptions, lies, labels. And a lot of us carry those things into adulthood. And those are the things that define us. And I wanted to write a story where a character gets to question the definition of herself that she's brought through her life and take control of her own narrative and become the hero of her own life story.
Right. And that main protagonist that we've alluded to is Danielle Warren, or Dani, as we see her in the book. Where did Dani come from? How did she just come fully formed to you, or is she an amalgam of people? What was it that brought her to the story?
She didn't come fully formed, and I don't think any of my characters do. I think that I start to envision a character, and the character I wanted to create was a character who defined herself by a childhood accident. And from that moment in her life, she saw herself as defective and inferior. So she became more fully formed as I wrote the story, as I asked myself over and over again, what would Dani do in this situation? And it's that's a question that she actually doesn't ask herself until she comes to a realization about herself, her relationship with her father and mother, and the person she is and the person she wants to become. So Dani is a little bit of me, a little bit of people I know who had different childhood experiences, and then she actually ultimately becomes her own person to me. She's very real to me, as I think all authors will say of their characters. And if you create a character that's really three-dimensional, then they begin to become more than you thought they were and define themselves.
You used the word perception a few minutes ago, and Dani is dealing with a childhood setback, let's call it, where she lost an eye. And perception becomes, it's not just a term we use for self-discovery and how we view the world. She literally is dealing with the problem of depth perception. When you live with 2 eyes and then you have one, the world changes. The way you see the world literally changes. Does that become a metaphor that, this physical ailment, does that lead us to look at her as a character and the way she sees the world metaphorically different?
I think that's a good question. I think that for Danny, it's interesting because as a reader, you can look at her and see that she lost an eye, but that shouldn't define her, because in anything that happens in your childhood that's traumatic or painful in that way can ultimately lead you to be a more empathetic, a more well-rounded person. Anytime you overcome something, you become more in a way. So I think more than anything, she's kind of used as a lesson to readers to say, hey, she's not the person she thinks she is. And ultimately, hopefully, leads to them asking the question, am I the person I think I am?
Right. Danny also, as young people, we a lot of times look at the relationship we have with our parents and our immediate family, and a lot of us is formed through those relationships and the people that we're going to be. She has an interesting relationship with her mother and father in this book. Tell us about how Danny is viewing the world through the relationships that she has with her parents.
Danny really believes that loss of her eyes started a cascade of events, and it led to her defining herself as defective and inferior and an embarrassment based on connections she made as a child before she understood the situation. So she looks at her mom's bitterness, her parents' divorce, and her dad's abandonment of the family as her fault.
And that cascades into all sorts of fun stuff in the book.
Exactly. That cascades into her having to look at her past and how she's defined herself through those things, and the realization ultimately that it's never about her. It had nothing to do with her. Those things, there are a lot of things that do have to do with her, but she's not responsible for the past. And if she built herself and created who she is on the building blocks of those definitions, and those definitions are faulty, then who is she? And that's a question she has to answer.
Right, right. The new book, The Speed of Falling Objects, is a very different book from When Elephants Fly. Yet, to me, when I'm reading this, the character of Danny and the character of Lily have a lot in common. They both have kind of inherited these hang-ups and fears that come with family life, and they're both kind of trying to figure out how they can avoid the hand that they feel like they've been dealt. Did that resonate with you in the writing at all? Did you see comparisons between Lily and Danny?
I definitely do see comparisons, and of course I always draw that back to me, right? I think that especially young adult writers, I feel like we a lot of times will look at our own past and issues that we've had and try to figure them out in our writing. It's very hard for me to live in the moment. That's the huge challenge for Lily. In terms of Danny, the labels that I had as a child, for example, in my family, I was told I was intellectually lazy. So that's like a label in my life that I've tried to overcome my whole life. And the truth of the matter is I just didn't like math and science, so I didn't try very hard. They weren't in my wheelhouse. Yet the things that you hear in your childhood do carry through to your adulthood. So I think the similarities between Danny and Lily have more to do with me figuring out my stuff. And I think the interesting thing to me is that, up to 70% of my readers are adult women. That's just the fact in young adult literature. And so I think the reason as adults that a lot of us like to read young adult novels is because we've carried things, we've carried baggage in our life, and through these characters, we actually get to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing that too. And maybe make some changes later in our lives.
That's such a great point, because I was also one of those kids who got labeled as someone who, didn't apply himself.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality was, I was like you, I hated algebra, and I didn't want to be there. It did not hold my attention. There were lots of other things that I was interested in that they just didn't offer. And looking back, that it's such a rude thing to say about a kid, is it? He or she just doesn't apply themselves. In writing these kinds of stories and uncovering this stuff, and then as readers, in reading about these characters, what do you think that we can do to that when we see a kid like a Danny or a Lily, that we could help them through that and not put that same baggage on them that we got saddled with?
I think just pointing out, if there's a child around you that you see with a really negative self-perception, ask that question. Where did you get that from? Who is that? Is that something you feel deep down, or who said that to you? And is that a label that you want to carry with you? And if you don't, what are you going to do to change it? Because ultimately, you really do get to define who you are. You get to create your own narrative. Other people can say things, but you don't have to internalize them. And I also think it's directing children to read to different stories that you think will help them, whatever their difficulty or experience is. There are so many young adult books out there that are incredible, that tackle just myriad subject matter. And I think now, if I'd had books like this to read as a kid, it might have changed my life. And so I would encourage adults to find the books that can connect with the younger people in their lives.
You mentioned earlier that the vast majority of your readers are adult women, though you write young adult. Do you feel like that those designations affect who finds the book, and what do you think about being labeled a young adult writer, and is that representative of the kinds of stories that you're trying to tell, or does it affect the kinds of stories that you tell? Does being put in this bucket, does that change the way you write?
I think that I write the stories I want to write. I think with When Elephants Fly, I combined elephant conservation, mental health conditions, living in the moment, all things that I think are very adult. I think when in The Speed of Falling Objects, I'm tackling discovering who you are and questioning the labels that were put on you and the labels you put on yourself. So I never feel like I'm writing for a younger audience. Being in the young adult world, as you know, from interviewing authors, comes with specific constraints. You have to be a lot more careful about what you write and making sure that, not that it's politically correct, but that it's very sensitive, whereas you don't necessarily have to do that in adult novels. So I would say that might be that is the one constraint that I find. In my first drafts, I find I have to go back and really look at it with more of a sensitive eye. Not that I'm incredibly politically incorrect, but I have been known to swear here and there. And and so I'd say that that's the one big challenge, being a young adult novelist. But I never feel like the stories I tell, I feel like they're very much for both adult and young adult audiences. And there's something for everyone in them.
What about writing characters that we can connect with and that are likable? In the new book, The Speed of Falling Objects, there are quite a few characters that are not likable characters. Of course, we empathize with Danny and we connect with her. But do you ever worry when you're creating characters that, oh man, the readers are going to hate this person, and do those people have places in the story? I guess, when you're creating characters, do you ever worry about how people are going to connect with them, and do we need a foil for our main protagonist?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because we're talking about Cougar Warren, who is Danny's father in The Speed of Falling Objects, and he is likable at first. He, like any TV star, he shines very brightly, but he is a necessary part of the story. And I don't want to, spoil the story for anyone, but he's not that likable for most people. And in the young adult world specifically, a lot of readers really want their characters to be ultimately redeemable and likable. Now, for me, as the author, Cougar's incredibly likable, because I have to find the humanity in every character I have and have to like them in some way. But you also do have to create a foil for your character. Danny in The Speed of Falling Objects was never going to grow in the way she needed to grow without Cougar and who he is and what he represents and the lies he's told and the truths she discovers and the decision ultimately to forgive her father for his flaws. It's not really about Cougar. It's really about creating a character for Danny. So I think unlikable characters definitely have a place in a story. You would never read an adult novel and say, well, I hated this one character, so I hated this novel. And my hope is with my readers that they'll understand that we all have a lot of people in our lives who might not be a 10 on the scale in terms of Cougar, in terms of narcissism and selfishness. But those people do allow us to grow. And if Danny can forgive her parents' mistakes and flaws, maybe readers who certainly probably don't have anyone in their lives to that extent as bad as Cougar can forgive and be kind to the people around them as well. Because ultimately, forgiving Cougar isn't about forgiving Cougar. It's for Danny's sake, so that she can move on with her life and she can not carry that baggage into adulthood.
Absolutely.
Did you hate him?
Oh, yeah. But like you said, sometimes it's not about that character. It's about how this other character interacts, and it's ultimately about Danny's growth. And I think you learn an important but sometimes a hard-won lesson in that you can't control other people, and how you interact with them sometimes is way more important than their actual individual behavior is.
Exactly, and I trust my young adult readers to be able to see that and understand that. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely. When you're working on a book like this, and you have such a definitive setting like the Amazon, how do you balance the amount of world building, and I'm making air quotes here, and description into a story like this? Like, how immersive do you need to make the setting for people, and how do you go about deciding on the depth of research that you need to do for a setting like that?
Well, it's kind of funny because I am Danny. I am afraid of spiders, snakes, insects of all kinds. I've been known to run from a fly. So the research for this novel was really hard for me. I started out researching spiders with a piece of paper that I would hold up to my computer over the image of the spider, and then I would read the information. I got more used to snakes, but spiders still, I'll post on Instagram a picture of a spider and I'll kind of, as I'm posting, cringe and lean back from the actual image. I can't stand them. But I needed to really immerse myself in the rainforest without going to the rainforest, because I would be, arms around my legs, rocking myself in a corner, of the Amazon. I wouldn't really probably be able to handle it. I couldn't camp in the Amazon even. So I did a ton of research. I watched a lot of videos from survivalists and how they go, build a fire, make shelter, find water, all those kind of things. And then at the same time, I probably cut 50 pages from this book of just tons of details from my first draft, because once I dug in, it's so fascinating. And reading individual stories of how people survive is unbelievable. So I loved doing the research. It was really important to get the feel of the rainforest. And then I had to notch it back to a point where people could feel like they were in the rainforest, but not get bogged down by too much information that I found fascinating, especially the medical information. There are a bunch of accidents and injuries in the story, and they were much more detailed in my first draft. I even went as far as putting maggots in wounds in order to breed them. And then I had my first readers read and say, okay, you have gone off the subject here.
Oh, it's like that scene in Grey's Anatomy when they just go too far.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I find it really, really fascinating. Wait, a bone is sticking out of someone's leg. How do you get it back in? So I find that incredible.
Right. I love it. I love it so much. Nancy, the new book, Speed of Falling Objects, is out everywhere now. Congratulations on the book launch. I can't wait to see how everyone receives this book. I know they're going to love it. It's out everywhere in Kindle edition, hardcover, and audio book. Tell everyone where they can connect with you online if they're just learning about you and want to dig into all that you do.
Sure. They can go to my website, which is nancyrichardsonfischer.com. They can also go to my email, which is nancyrichardsonfisherauthor@gmail.com, and I will always write back. And on my website, they can also sign up for my newsletter, which will give sneak peeks and giveaways and secret things as well.
And all the good stuff is on Instagram as well, right?
Yes, Nan Fisher Author on Instagram.
Awesome. We're going to link to all of it in the show notes of this episode. Nancy, it's always fun catching up. Thank you so much for joining me again, and congratulations on the new book.
Thanks so much, Hank. It's always wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you to Nancy Richardson Fischer for joining me on the show today. Be sure to click on her book in the show notes of this episode so that you can go to Amazon and grab your copy. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The ancient building wore the severe cassock colors of a Puritan minister, a uniform monochrome of slate-gray shingles and soot-gray clapboards, its shadowed upper windows cross-hatched like the facets of a spider's eye. The second story protruded beyond the first and bore the house's only ornament, 2 gray teardrops of wood, weeping from each corner of the building's stiff upper lip. The place would have looked sinister and foreboding in its shadowed alley if not for the die-cut silhouette of a dancing sheep, jaunty above the door, and the 2 front bay windows that blazed with colorful, welcoming light. The windows were hung with orbs of colored glass on staggered lengths of ribbon. Each orb glowed with autumnal reds and delicate greens, burgundy tints and pumpkin hues, dappled raspberry and clover lime, streaked with light and weightless as bubbles over a cauldron. The shelves below offered crystal skulls and silver daggers and horny devils, Celtic chalices and woven dream catchers in dreamcoat hues. A primitive broom leaned in a corner, ready for flight, and a rhapsodic nude in bronze clutched her goat-legged lover beneath a jackal bust of Anubis. The interior of the shop was even witchier. Above a crude and sooty fireplace, a stack of brick barely holding the shape of a chimney pushed through the barn-high roof, threading ancient beams that crisscrossed overhead. Brooms and kettles and Christmas lights dangled from these, alongside Halloween costumes and Chinese umbrellas, pointy hats and bundles of herbs. Jason wandered deeper into the shop. His fingers trailed across strange bronze statuary and Aztec masks of turquoise and lapis lazuli. He rolled his eyes at the luck candles and money charms, but goggled indecently at a nude and anatomically correct silver nymph with long golden hair that reminded him of Kate. "See anything you like?" Jason jumped, turned, and jumped again. The woman standing before him was the living embodiment of every hippy-dippy counterculture type he'd ever seen. Her hair was green, her face pale and round, her doughy body wrapped in some elaborately woven ethnic garb. Her eyebrows were black and pierced in little rows, and her eyes were heavily circled with midnight blue, as if she'd been sucker punched by an oil slick. She tapped the glass over the nymph. "Admiring the goddess, I see." She'd practically caught him with porn. "You want to hold her? She won't break. Here." The woman flipped open a glass door and handed Jason the naked figure. "See how heavy she is? You could bang her against the wall all day and barely make a dent." She waggled her eyebrows, obviously enjoying his discomfort. He checked the price tag. $700? "The goddess is a symbol of love and fertility. Don't be ashamed of desiring her." The woman's long green fingernails plucked a long black cigarette from a long red case, and she lit it. "I sense," she blew smoke and studied its whorls, "dissatisfaction in love. Yes, I have just the thing." She pulled Jason into a side room where the smell of her clove smoke gave way to the skunky aromas of potpourri sachets, tea leaves, and hanging clutches of twiggy flowers. She searched, found a little bundle, and pressed it into his hand. "This will make you irresistible. Rub it on your nethers twice a day, and love shall surely find you." Jason made a face. The bundle smelled like cow manure. He didn't even want that on his hands.